Thank you, Steve, and good morning to everyone. Well done for braving the weather and making it in this morning. Normally when you say braving the weather in this country, you're talking about storms or snow or wild rain, but actually, isn't it timely that London Climate Action Week is happening this week with a heat wave? Hopefully that sends a message to all the participants there. So welcome to Circular Steel. My name is Shravan Joshi. I'm one of the elected members in the City of London Corporation and a former chairman of planning. I'm currently the Deputy Chairman of Investments, and that looks after our own investment portfolio. We're one of the top 10 freeholders across London by value, and so as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time thinking about the buildings that go up, the ones that come down, and increasingly the ones we choose to keep. The title we've been given this morning is The Decisions That Shape Steel, and I want to just dwell on that word, decisions, because every ton of steel that gets specified, reused, recycled, or sent to landfill is the result of a choice that someone has made, often early, often quietly, and sometimes without realizing how much is actually riding on that decision. So my pitch to you this morning is a very simple one. The decisions we make about steel, and crucially, when we make them, are what shape whether this industry becomes genuinely circular or simply talks about it. At the City of London, we take seriously our role in leading and supporting that transition to a more circular, more sustainable economy. That is not a slogan for us, it's actually a responsibility that we take very much to heart. Here is why it matters in our patch. In 2022, the square mile produced around 287,000 tonnes of waste. Of that, about 193,000 tonnes, about two-thirds, was inert construction and demolition waste. When you're a single square mile producing that volume from the built environment, you cannot look away from it. That's why our circular economy framework, which runs from 2024 to 2040, commits us to a systemic shift in how the city operates with the ambition of becoming a circular city by 2040. We want to create cutting-edge reuse to stop the exception, stop it becoming the exception and to become standard practice somewhere around 2030 to 2035. And steel sits right at the heart of that because it is light, strong, it's recyclable, and it's adaptable to whatever the building needs to become next. And we're not alone in this. The West Midlands has its own circular economy route map. Hackney has its own strategy. Over in the Royal Docks, Tipping Point East has opened up as the first demonstrator for construction material reuse hubs across London. Every one of these recognises the same truth. Construction is the largest consumer of raw materials and the biggest producer of waste. If you want to move the needle on a circular economy, you start with the built environment. Now, the ground beneath all of us is moving fast. The UK steel strategy landed in January of this year, and it's worth understanding what's coming next. Days from now, new trade measures come into force to protect and stabilise domestic steel production, with an ambition to lift UK production to between 40 and 50% of our own demand. There is a push towards green decarbonised steel and modern electric arc furnace technology aligned with our own net zero goals. In January 2027, the UK cross-border adjustment measures arrive, designed to stop us simply exporting our carbon emissions and patting ourselves on the back at home. None of this is simple. None of this is easy to comprehend. Tariffs, carbon metrics, shifting local authority requirements, changes in domestic production. It's a great deal to keep track of. In the city, the most powerful lever we have is the planning system itself. We operate a retrofit-first approach delivered through our carbon optioning process, which means retention of an existing building has to be properly considered before any hint of redevelopment is mentioned. And it seems to be working. In 2025, 56% of our major applications, that's 10 out of 18, were retrofit projects. That's the highest quantum of major projects across central London. The most sustainable steel is the steel you never have to move, the material that stays exactly where it is. And where we do extend, steel lets us add light, low-carbon floor space without tearing into the structure. This is hardwired now into how we plan. Circular economy and reuse policies sit in our City Plan 2040, which we expect to adopt later this year. Our planning for sustainability guidance puts steel reuse front and centre, alongside designing buildings now so they can be taken apart and reused later. We are comfortable with whole-life carbon and embodied carbon now. The new frontier is resource efficiency. Reused steel, high recycled content steel, EAF steel. When an application comes to us, these choices are now visible and they matter. At City Place, State Construction salvaged around 1,500 tonnes of steel. The bulk went to a recipient building at 30 Duke Street in Westminster. Some was reused on site at 2 Aldermanbury Square, and the rest was stored by a steel manufacturer for its next life. At 20 Gilsborough Street, faced with height and underground constraints, the team increased the building's floor space by 40% without changing its massing. They jacked and repositioned 2,520 square metres of structural floor slab, relocated and reused 240 tonnes of structural steel on site, and saved real money and real programme time by doing this. These are not simply theories, they are finished projects in the ground in our city. The technical knowledge, the guidance and the standards are largely already in place. The challenge in front of us now is not invention, it is scaling delivery through the supply chain in a way that is practical and economically viable. So let me leave you with what I would genuinely love you to carry into the rest of today's programme. First, have a strategy for steel, or at the very least be clear on how those decisions are getting made on your projects. Where does your steel come from? What happens to it at the end of its life? How are you weighing carbon, reuse, and supply chain against cost and risk? That is the UK steel strategy brought right down to the level of your very next project. Second, aim for efficient reuse, and that's not reuse at any cost, as Steve rightly said. The goal is to reuse where it genuinely makes sense across time, cost, risk, and carbon calculations. Third, the behavioural unlock. And for my money, this is where the big decisions lie. Asking the right questions at the right time, because early informed decisions create opportunities that are simply gone if you ask those questions too late. The most valuable thing in any project room is often a good question asked early. And finally, use this room. Today you're sitting alongside a cross-section of the supply chain, people who have dared to ask those questions and have been willing to try, and who are generous enough to share what they have learnt with everyone today. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve, for organising this event, and I hope you have a successful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Shravan. I mean, that's brilliant, because it just undermines the way I think about this stuff, and it's great that we're aligned in the way we talk about having that strategy for yourself, for your project, for your business, understanding that you need to have some of this in mind, otherwise the decisions get made without you realising. So, yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Shravan. Really appreciate that.